Welcome to Ask GMBN Tech. This is the weekly show where we get to answer your tech-related mountain bike questions. You can fire your questions into the email addresses on the screen right now. You can get them to us via Facebook page on GMBN Tech and of course in the comments below. Now we're going to get straight to a load of questions you guys have been asking us from last week. So first up is from Andrew Brown. It's related to carbon fibre frames, so quite a topical thing here. Carbon frame inspection in particular. Are there certain things to look for when inspecting a frame for damage? I've got a 1/4 inch wide chip that goes into the carbon on my frame, for example. Should I have my local shop look at this, or are there ways I can address cosmetic versus structural damage on my own? So the first thing I suggest you look at is take a good look at it and make sure the chip actually does go deep into the carbon and it's not just the paint and the lacquer on there. Because on carbon frames the lacquer can be quite thick. I mean, if it is just a chip like you say it is, technically it should be okay, but I would go with your first instinct and get it checked just to be safe. That'd be the same in the alloy frame. If you've got hairline cracks and things, you should have that stuff checked out. Now, as far as structurally knowing whether it's damaged or not, there's a few little telltale signs. So I've been told by various manufacturers that chips don't necessarily mean it's going to crack or fail. Regardless, you should still check that. But cracks in the paint can be a telltale of it's had some sort of trauma. And likely if there's a crack in the actual paint, it may well be a crack in the actual carbon or the resin and the epoxy is separated underneath. So you need to find that out. Now there are a few specialist places that x-ray frames, but you've got to bear in mind not a lot of people actually have this service. And there's one on screen now that I found in the UK that offer this. There's a couple more in California that I found and around the world. And what they do is they take your frame in, they inspect it completely and they basically repair that damage. Now this particular one is certified by Colnago, Trek and Specialized, so you know it's like the real deal. And I'd be cautious to make sure that if you are going to have to get a carbon frame fixed, make sure it is by someone that's done work for one of the bigger brands at the very least. So interesting, another thing I was told by a few different carbon specialists is about the sounds that carbon frames make. So typically when you flick a carbon frame, it should make quite a crisp sound. And if it's got a crack in it or it's got structural damage, that actually the sound doesn't transmit in the same way and it could be quite a dull sort of thud. Of course you're going to notice this more on a traditional double diamond layout frame like a road frame or a hardtail mountain bike than you will with a full suspension frame. So there's a lot of other parts of the frame that can actually mask that sound. So I think that's one for the experts to tell, not necessarily you at home. But like I said initially, like if your instinct tells you to get it checked out, I would definitely get it checked. Next up is a suspension related question from Corey Stevenson. Hi guys, is there a universal front fork lockout? Currently I'm running a Manitou fork and the lockout in my option is unsatisfactory. Thanks. In a word, no, basically, because there's so many different elements with suspension forks. So some forks have externally adjustable damping, some don't. Some have the air leg in the left hand side, some have it in the right hand side. So for obvious reasons the cap couldn't actually be the same to fit any old fork. And of course if the tubing itself is the same size, still doesn't mean that the thread is going to be the same pitch on the top. So it's fairly unlikely you're going to get one that's going to be compatible with yours. Now with Manitou forks you can tune them aftermarket, so a better option might be if the fork isn't performing as you want it to, go and speak to your mechanic at the bike shop and have a chat with him and see if there's any sort of little tuning things he can do with that particular fork. Or if you perhaps comment again in the comments below and tell me what model of fork is, what year it is, I might be able to get a bit more information for you, but that's about it I'm afraid for this one. Next up is from Rupert S. I've got a 2016 RockShox Lyric RCT3, good fork that. And when I gave it a lower leg service the other day, I noticed the rebound damper shaft was wobbly, and I'm not sure if it's a good thing. For as long as I can remember, my forks have made a discreet sucking sound, and I was wondering if the wobbly damper shaft is the cause. Okay, so bear in mind that when you do a fork lower leg service, you slide those lowers off, exposing the upper legs with the air shaft and the damping shaft. Now the air shaft is better sealed than the damping shaft, which only has a single O-ring. So that is a fairly unsupported shaft that's going into that damper. That is supported by the bolt into the lower legs that holds the whole thing together and that guides it in place. So that's always going to have a bit of wobble. As far as the noise goes, to me it just sounds like that is your rebound working properly. That is the oil being pulled back through the shims. Now you could do a little experiment to test this out for yourself. Dial on a few more clicks of rebound so as to make the fork slower and go and jump off a couple of things and you should hear it sort of squelching that noise as the fork extends. Now try it with less clicks on there, so it's faster, and you'll find the noise will still be there, but be a far more subtle. So if that's the cause, then that's fine. If not, there is a slight chance that your damper might need bleeding or just needs a little overhaul. But more than likely, it is just the noise of the oil flowing through the shims and the ports inside the fork. Next up is from Neil Wardby. Hi Dolly, can you do something on how to keep internal cable routing from rattling? It's driving me crazy out on rides. Yeah, actually I've got a frame that's doing the very same to me at the moment. That gravel frame I borrowed off the guys at Nukeproof wasn't a production one, and it hasn't got the internal sort of mounts to hold the cables, so the cables do rattle on that. So yeah, I'm going to do something to show you how to do that, but there are a few different ways you can do this yourself. Now the easy option is trying to eliminate the cable rattle from the outside. So normally from the outside of the frame, there's 1 or 2 cables that go in. If you can tie them together with cable ties or a bit of electrical tape, you do it at both ends, you can actually put a bit of compression on there. That can help stop things. But a really neat one that I've seen people do, and this applies with cables that are just on their own on the inside of the frame and they're rattling around, is get some tiny zip ties, you tie them around the cable and you push it in through the cable hole and then push it along the cable. And basically what happens is the tail of that zip tie springs out and sits against the frame, pushing the cable up against one side of the frame on the inside, so it helps stop it coming out of position and rattling around. So I will actually make a video on silencing internal cable rattle and all sorts of other creaks, groans and noises that bikes make. So I think there's a whole bunch of good tips I can share with you there. Next up is from Fernando Fojo. I have a 2013 Specialized Hard Rock, and being an older model hardtail XC bike, it has a 3x8 transmission. I'm not a fan, I see the advantage of 1x systems. I'm currently saving for a new full sus bike, but my question is, are there 1x transmissions which would be compatible with my bike? I'd like to keep it and have it as I can basically, seeing as there isn't anything wrong with it. Well, first up, all sort of 1x transmissions would be compatible with your bike. It's just the extent of how far you want to go. So for example, you could buy a Shimano SLX setup. So that would be a crank that comes with a chainring, chain, cassette, rear derailleur and a shifter. That's a full 1x setup. Crank will also come with a bottom bracket on there, so you'd have everything new. Of course, that is the expensive way of doing it. Now, in your case, if you want to do this the cheapest and fastest way, what you need to do is get a dedicated 1x specific chainring. So that's a narrow wide chainring. Remove your current chainrings, all 3 of them. Remove the front derailleur and remove the shifter, and then mount this new chainring in place of the middle chainring. Then you've got a 1x setup. It'd be 1x8, so you obviously won't have as much gear range, you won't have as low or as high a gear as you currently have, and you do need to factor in the size chainring you need for that bike. For example, I'm running a 34 and I think the average seems to be between a 30 and a 36 depending on conditions and the spread of gears available at the back. Now bear in mind that if you do just want to put a bigger cassette on there as well, you will need a new chain to go with that, and you're also going to need a new rear derailleur and a shifter. So obviously the cheapest option is just to buy a chainring. You can have a 1x setup. Next one's another suspension related question from Patrick Marcinek. Hi Dolly, I'm a big fan of GMBN Tech and I'd like to ask you if you have any experience with MRP Ramp Control. I like the idea of tool-free and quick change of suspension progressivity whenever I want. Is it worth the money? Do you know what? MRP Ramp Control, like this one here, it's a really, really nice bit of kit. So in case you don't know, on air suspension forks, you can change the volume adjustment on them by placing these volume adjusting spacers inside. Air, obviously, when you put it in a confined space, it's naturally progressive, so it ramps up. So it gets a lot harder to compress the last bit of travel. Now, depending on how many you put in each fork, you know, so whether it's a Fox or a RockShox, etc., you can change the characteristics of the fork. So if I put 3 of these in a fork and I had it against a fork with none in, I'd be running, say, the same pressure, but with the one with 3 of these in, it'd be a little bit more supple initially, then it'd be a lot firmer and the fork would sit in the middle of the travel a bit better, and it'd be really, really hard to bottom it out, to the degree that it can feel quite harsh on your wrists. Now the fork running with none of those in, the fork again will feel supple, but I'm going to use a lot more travel all the time, and when it goes to the end of the stroke, it can be quite an impact as the fork bottoms out. Now what MRP Ramp Control does, this goes in place of the air cap on the fork and replaces what these would do to an extent. So basically, when you have a ramp control in there, if you hit a big impact, the air has to pass through the ports in here and it restricts the amount of air that can get through them. So the fork ramps up and it feels like a much firmer fork in that situation. But as soon as it goes back to normal impacts, the ports open again and it becomes a lot more supple, like a fork with no volume spaces in there. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds if you want. Really nice bit of kit. It is pricey though. Another suspension related question, this time from Rowan Connolly. Please help me. When I remove my lower legs on my fork to do a lower leg service, the oils were different colours. Red in the drive side leg and a weird creamy cloudy oil in the non-drive side leg. Which oils do I buy or which leg? Well, firstly, you haven't said what fork it is, so I'm sort of unaware there. But bear in mind that the oil that's in the lower legs of virtually every fork on the market is just lubricating oil. It's nothing to do with the damping, and therefore it should be the same oil in both legs. So it does sound to me that it's just contaminated. Now that could happen from dirt and muck that's ingressed into the fork leg itself, or it could be from grease that's elsewhere in the fork. So if you do a lower leg service, assume you've taken those legs off, clean them and replace them with some nice new fresh lube in there, you should be fine. Obviously you need to make sure you put the correct amount of lubricating oil in the fork, because you put too much and you can actually damage the seals on those forks. And it does say on all the major manufacturers how much you should put in them, and if it's on RockShox, on the actual little bolts on the bottom, it should say like 5cc or 15cc, tells you how much you need to put in there. And next up, this is a transmission one. This is good. This is from Ari Nathan. I have a weird shifting problem. When I pedal backwards in the first gear, it switches down to the third gear. The cables are new and my limit screws are adjusted correctly. Thank you. Okay, Ari, well, you've got to bear in mind that the transmission on bikes are, especially bikes with derailleurs like this one, they're designed to work in one direction. You only need to sort of freewheel. You don't really need to backpedal at any point on a bike. If it's the case, if you're going through a turn, you want to lower your next crank, just do half crank forwards at each time. You don't need to pedal backwards to do that. However, most bikes shouldn't be skipping gears when you're pedaling backwards. So assuming your derailleur is correctly adjusted, there's a few things it could be. Now, assuming that your transmission is working correctly, is changing gear the right way, there's a number of little things here. When you're pedaling forwards on the rear derailleur, the upper guide wheel, that is the one that keeps the chain in line. When you're pedaling backwards, there isn't anything to do that, so you're subject to the chain line. So firstly, if you've got a poor chain line on your bike, that's going to have a significant effect. So when you said you were in first gear, you haven't said if that was first gear just on the rear cassette, or if you mean like first gear and one of three at the front, or just a single one. So if you're in an extreme gear, let's just say middle or big at the front, and you're in the big at the back, then the chain is crossing over at such an angle, it's naturally not going to want to sit onto that upper sprocket. Now also there are ramps on your cassette, which are designed for the chain to hop up. They also have the opposite effect when you're pedaling backwards. They want the chain to hop back down. So you've got to bear these things in mind. Now, if your chain is old, it's going to have more sort of lateral flex to it. So it's less likely to do this. With a newer chain, it's going to have way less flex. So again, even a perfectly set up bike, there is a chance that the gear could skip and come down one. Finally, if this happens across all of your gears, I mean, I know you said between first and third, if this happens across all your gears, it could be a stiff link, it could be a stiff jockey wheel, or even a bent derailleur. There's a number of things it could be. But don't be too alarmed as long as your gears are working correctly running forwards. Oh, this is kind of a retro-related question from Mainsman. Given that motorbikes have been using upside-down forks for over 30 years, it seems strange they've never caught on with mountain bikes. I assume there must be a good reason. They've been pretty much standard on dirt bikes for years. What's stopping them on mountain bikes? Well, yeah, you're right. You know, there's not many on the market. There are a few modern ones these days. There's a Devio Emerald downhill fork, which is a flipping good fork, and they've basically addressed a lot of the issues that have plagued upside-down forks. Now, one of the reasons mountain bikes don't tend to use upside-down forks is, A, to make them is very expensive, and the reason for that is they have to make them immensely stiff. To make them stiff, you tend to make something very heavy, or you have to make it a very expensive workaround, like DVO have done. They've got a carbon lower arch, which kind of makes them feel like they're a regular way out fork, but they've got the advantages of the seals being lubed all the time. Now, over the years, there have been a lot of different people who have tried this. So for all you people that haven't seen this, one of the earliest ones was from Mountain Cycles, who came out with a fork called the Suspenders. So that was an upside down inverted single crown fork, and that was seen on the Mountain Cycles San Andreas, which also had the Pro Stop disc brakes and a whole bunch of other things. And there was one in Rewind, a couple of GMBN Tech shows back. So if you have another look on the screen now, you'll see that fork. It's an absolutely stunning piece of kit, and it worked really well. Following that came the Hausen inversion fork. Again, inverted, single crown, except this one had a brace that operated in 2 slots in the upper legs. So this thing was great when it was dry, never too good when it was wet, and it had these crazy rubber boots that covered the whole fork. Kind of nice. I'd quite like one just as a retro bit of kick, so that's a really different way of thinking. Now, Manitou have got the Dorado. That fork is still produced, just about, and it's one of the nicest looking forks of all time, I think. Full carbon. It's got lovely aluminium CNC'd crowns. Works really well, but it is known as being quite flexy. Now, some people don't mind that because there's an element of flex in riding that's actually quite good. It's good for comfort and it's good for traction. Sometimes you can have a front end that's too stiff on a bike, and you actually end up with the front wheel that's sort of scratching for grip a bit more. So I think a lot of the people who've ridden Manitou over the years have actually loved that fork, but it's definitely a sort of a Marmite thing. And another bendy one was the Marzocchi Shiver. I mean, I had a set of these back in the day, and they were so nice to ride, so plush, but they were bendy as anything. But again, they looked so moto that you kind of forgave them for the looks. Then there was a few other sort of random ones on the market. There was the Mr. Dirt fork, which was absolutely enormous. I can't find out much information about this online, but I do know a guy who's still got a pair of these, so I'm going to try and go and have a look at those and see if I can bring them in to have a look at on the show. Now there's also White Brothers. They used to do the UD 150. Now White Brothers used to be a sort of sister company or part of MRP back in the day, and that was a really, really good fork from what I remember. And then yet again, there's another one. There's a Foes Fabrications F1 fork. So Brent Foes was doing his thing with the inverted forks and long travel bikes long before anyone else was. Coming from an off-road background with motocross bikes and all-terrain vehicles, Brent also brought in the Kern shock technology, which has got a massive stable platform on it, so it enabled you to have a long travel shock, and these were used originally on sort of the big desert racing trucks. If you think, imagine having a truck with all that suspension travel trying to go around a turn, the whole thing would be wallowing. So it'd have an inertia valve on there, so the forces of the body roll would actually be countered, so it'd keep it quite stable, and you had that on his early bikes, so that was a really cool thing. Then of course there's the RockShox RS1, which is a fairly modern fork, so that's not talking about the original one which came out in like the late 80s, talking about the inverted one, carbon fibre cross-country super fork. That's a pretty special bit of kit, but very expensive to produce. Now finally, of course, there's the Cannondale Lefty. So as well as being an inverted fork, it's a single leg fork as well. And that works because it's four-sided and it's got roller bearings on each of those sides. And I mean, most people don't tend to like the Lefty. I love them. I love the fact it's such a bizarre thing, and Cannondale insisted on producing it for so long. So the problem really has always been the stiffness to weight ratio, and of course getting the costing down, not only in production, but how much they cost the consumer. So you think with the mass production on regular weight forks, they're so common now, and a lot of them share the same sort of chassis between models. Now you're pretty limited with upside down forks in the way you do this. So that was the end of this week's Ask GMBN Tech. Hopefully my answers have helped enlighten some of you. If not, let us know in the comments below if there's stuff you want me to expand on even further, or maybe even turn into other videos. If you've got suggestions, let me know in the comments. And of course you can fire in your questions to the email address on the screen. For a couple more useful videos, if you want to find out how to repair tyreable slashes, if you fancy getting handy with a needle and thread, click down here. And if you want to find out how to pick the right mountain bike for you, click up there. As always, click on the globe to subscribe and share it around, get your mates to subscribe. And if you like the video, give us a thumbs up.